we've done a lot of episodes this year in regard to different professionals from the backgrounds of trauma or psychiatry. We brought in people that have experienced war, but what we haven't been able to do um, is take somebody that has experienced war on a different aspect from the civilian side. Because a lot of these are very much geared towards veterans, but at the same time, I like talking about mental health and all these issues when it comes to anybody. I don't want to just focus on that one little group. So what made today different is I was able to actually find somebody, and I'll let her kind of give her background before we really get into it, so everyone understands just the scope of what we're looking at. But somebody who lived through a war as a teen on the civilian side and was in the battle and saw it all and then grew up in that and then took all of that and then still went into trauma and went into all these realms and then later on became a professor also, and then you get your PhD. So um, in my personal opinion, when it comes to like grabbing an expert and bringing them in, this is for me like that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It's a civilian side and it's the doctor side. And then today is a very different episode as well, where we're not like talking on somebody's personal experiences and just kind of helping others walk through it. We're actually going to dissect trauma because that is Dr. Uku's specialty, and have her explain it in a way that people that are trying to help others or people that want to understand trauma a little bit better can actually get that perspective and then take that with them onto wherever they want to go. So with that, I'm going to introduce Dr. Tamara Ukwu, PhD, and then I'll let her introduce herself. Please give a little bit of background. I talked a little bit, but just so everyone here understands who you are, what you've been through, and then what you do now.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you very much for having me. And thank you all for being patient and for waiting and for joining us. I'm super excited to be here today. As Alex said, my name is Tamara Ukwu. I am currently based in Canada, in Vancouver, British Columbia. And I can explain how my journey was bringing me. I did not leave Bosnia as a refugee. I was leaving more to pursue my educational and adventures and to kind of like grow professionally. And my goal was always to go back to Bosnia, which is still not happening. But here in Canada, I am a registered social worker and I'm also a registered clinical counselor. I'm trauma therapist, and I do specialize in complex trauma, PTSD, nervous system regulation. As Alex mentioned, I also teach students. I'm department head of counseling department at Stanberg College here in Vancouver, and I supervise emerging clinicians as well. I work in BC Children's Hospital. So that's where I'm social worker, helping kids in child psychiatry and I have my private practice. So I do a lot. Plus, I have my own family and three children, and I think overworking is also a trauma response. When I'm thinking about myself, I think what I'm doing is kind of like a way of give back, heal, find a way how to be helpful and how to help others. So now, um, as you mentioned, I am originally from Bosnia. When war started in 1992, I was 12 years old. And I spent the next 4 years in the war. We did not leave. I left Bosnia 10 years after the war in 2007 when I came to States for my master's at University of Minnesota. So I lived in States and then I moved to Canada for my PhD. So during my life in Bosnia, during those teen years, as many other teenagers, I was caught by surprise and really did not know at the beginning what was happening. Um, and and I don't know how much you know about Bosnian War, but we can go on that. It's war that really happened for us, experiencing it as civilians, since it happened over the night. over the night, we just stopped going to school. We moved from our apartments into the basements, and that's where we basically lived for the next 4 years in shelters. We stayed without water, electricity, and other basic supplies, and then we were in siege for 4 years. I don't know if I mentioned, I was based in Sarajevo, so that is the city where I lived in. So that's a little bit, I can go in many directions from here, what I want to share, where I want to go, but that is a little bit of the background. What brought me into helping profession was really after the war, and you can imagine, we did not go to school. I did not finish in a normal way, let me put that way, high school. So I stopped at grade 6, that was my last grade. And when I returned to school, that was grade 11. But basically, we did not return to study. We returned to clean the schools, to rebuild them, and just to kind of like be busy a bit. So I had a huge gap in education, and we were trying to just catch up and be able to have some basic knowledge to be enrolled at university. But lots of young people did not choose to go that way. So I was looking at my peers, really using lots of substances to cope, many different ways just to numb themselves, to forget, and not to deal. I thankfully did not go that way. My way was to try to study, to try to figure out what on earth has just happened to all of us, and to see how I can help to my friends, to my peers who really were struggling. So that is how I enrolled in social work. And what we were doing back in Bosnia at that time is that we started to self-organize. As a group of young people, we were self-organized. We taught ourselves to write grants, to do advocacy, to really lobby to get funding to provide some supports for young people who could not have that support. So addictions were huge. And my kind of like point of entry into the profession was through addictions field. So I was working in addictions field for a long time. I specialized in primary prevention of addiction, and I burned out. That didn't last too long. I burned out, and then I moved more towards child psychiatry and another work that I can explain a little bit more later. I came to US. Sometimes I like to joke by accident is because how I came is that I was at a conference and there was lots of social workers and I was allowed to leave the country. Not everybody had visa to leave the country, so my university sent me to Croatia, to Dubrovnik, a beautiful city by the way, and to present how it's to live in the war. And one of American professors asked me on the stage like this with lots of people around, what am I planning after I finished my bachelor's of social work? And I was so angry. That question really made me angry because when you live in war, you don't plan anything. There's no plan, and you kind of like trust the fate and trust. And I showed that anger, and I said, I'm really angry with your question, and I don't know what to answer. My plan is just to survive, and my plan is just to make it maybe through the next year, and that's how far I can plan. I cannot plan to go for masters. We don't have funding, we don't have anything. We're just fighting to survive. So I said to her, and I felt so bad later, but I said to her, don't ever ask child from the war what are our plans because we don't plan anything. And then she approached me later and she said, when you finish your bachelor's, please connect with me. I will help you come to States. I will help you come for your master's if that is your dream. And I said, forget it. You are another one who just wants to save child from the war. I will never contact you. And she was very stubborn. She took my information. And several years after I finished study, she found me and she asked, are you ready for this master's program? We are ready for you. And I said, okay, let me just first come and see what is America. How do you guys live there? What is it? And she brought me for a visit 3 months. I did lots of presentations. I love the school. I love the system, and that's how I actually came to US to finish my master's. And I never went back after that to live. I was visiting. So that's where my anger brought me. And I always say people when they're angry, I said, allow yourself to be angry. You never know where it will bring you. Anger is not always the bad thing. But that is my story, Alex. I will just leave it there to see if you would like to direct me in whatever
Okay.
direction you want.
All right. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be in and out. What I'm doing right now is Maria Vanessa actually is in here. What happened was the library had a massive issue with Zoom. So what we're trying to do now is I'm communicating with her on the side to try to get anybody that got a reservation for the event on the other end access to this one, to this link, which Maria Vanessa I'll drop into the chat so that way it can go to them, so that way we can keep going. Um, anyway, um, so I mean, you already kind of the big one I was going to say is what was it like as a teen? I know personally you have told me what some of your friends had to do in order to get food, which
Yeah.
of course is uh, terrible. I mean, if you want to get into that, we can. Everyone who
Yes.
comes to the show knows exactly what they're getting themselves into. We always warn people that sometimes it might get pretty tough and pretty intense, but that's the whole point, right? And then the other one I had with the background was if you could elaborate a little bit more on like how witnessing all of this firsthand allowed you to better understand trauma and also post-traumatic stress. And then from there, we'll get into the actual breakdown of trauma. But if you want to just highlight uh, kind of more of the intensities of what you went through, including that story that you told me about the food with your friends, and
Mhm.
then also just kind of how it helps that level of experience helps you kind of better understand trauma itself. And then
Mhm.
PTSD, then we'll go into the breakdowns of trauma.
Mhm. Absolutely. Um, So as a teenager, as I said, it happened really, really fast. The huge segment of all war for us was that unpredictability. And what it meant in the practice is that we would wake up every day really not knowing how the life will look like. And not just that, but basically who will make it through the day. Um, and and as we lived in the basements, we were not, at the beginning, we were really not that careful because we didn't know what bombs are. Bombs were falling on us, grenades, but we did not know. We were just sitting outside and we did not have that, which later, as a civilian, you develop that, you learn how to listen and you kind of like start recognizing different sounds of the bombs and different sounds of not just bombs, but bullets. We would know when something was shooted from our side. And sorry if I'm not using correct words. English is my second language, which I also learned in the war. I learned English. I taught myself English in the basement because I was bored. So I was sitting and learning English and German. So that's how I learned myself. I taught myself English. So during that unpredictability at the beginning, as kids, every morning after all night shooting, we would just kind of like try to run out from basement and go collect whatever we would find that looked like bomb. So we were bringing anything and everything, and sometimes unexploded missiles would be there that would really kill kids because we did not know what this is. And parents were going with us very often to see what was happening because we also wanted every morning to see what damage has been done, who survived, who didn't, etc., etc. Um, I personally was part of three massacres. Thankfully, in all three of them, I was not severely injured, but I did witness where my friend was and grenade fell on her and she just disappeared. There was nothing left of her. And this was because in Bosnian War, civilians were a huge target. In that siege, we were, especially as kids, we were bombed all the time. Wherever there was any indication that they are kids, that there's a group of kids, that would be the target. It would be, and our basketball court in front of our building, that was always the target. And I did lose several friends there. Uh, and it was really, really, really difficult at that time because we were not ready for losses that were happening. During so as war was progressing, our supplies of food were really decreasing completely. There was no a way for food to come into the city. So kids were trying to find many different ways to provide food for themselves and parents. So some of my friends, this is a story that I shared with Alex, were really targeting international soldiers because they had food and they had, I remember it sometimes chocolates or cigarettes, and our local girls would be using their bodies, which is now we know that it's prostitution, but at that time I didn't understand. I was so young, but they were using their bodies to get food from international soldiers, which also was making me angry at the war to see how that advantage was taken of local girls for food and for supplies of cigarettes and chocolates. I do specifically remember chocolates because I was seeing kids writing chocolate on the hand, and they were going to these headquarters and asking for chocolate, and they were so easy to be taken advantage of, and they were. Some of them were. So my specific friends got herself into prostitution through these channels. That was
They were
one of
young too, correct? You said
13,
they were, yeah,
14,
13,
12.
14.
Yeah, very, very young. Um, and I know that later when war stopped and I started studying social work, and one of our practicum placements was orphanage, there was lots of kids as a product of that. They were like biracial kids. And if you know Bosnia, Bosnia is just kind of like one race. So, but these kids that were left in orphanage were kids that I have another completely story, but because my PhD research was all about missing kids and what was happening specifically to kids who were evacuated from Bosnia and who were in orphanages and who were vulnerable. But kids were taken advantage of. I don't know if you are now in media right now. There is a research that has been conducted, which is related to, it's called Human Safari, and it's talking about kids of Sarajevo who were targets of, again, I'm saying international. When I say international, I mean anybody who is not from Balkans, who is not from Bosnia, Serbia, Croatia. So people from abroad who were coming and paying to shoot at kids in Sarajevo. So if you Google human safari Sarajevo, you will see right now there's lots of stories. There's investigation that is going on that people were paying up to $90,000 to be able to shoot at the children. Children were specific targets and more expensive, but people in general were the targets, just to satisfy whatever their adventure needs were. So those are some of the experience. So when we stayed without food, because in 1993, the end of 1993, 1994, it's when we really didn't have any food, and it was really difficult and it was very hard. There was no electricity, there was no food. And when we have food, that means all neighborhood is having food. So when I say we stayed without food, means there was nowhere in the street food anymore. There was nowhere in community. We had to find a way. So one of the way was humanitarian aid sometimes was delivered by planes, and they would just kind of like drop food, but for some reason they were dropping soaps to us. I don't know why we needed soaps. We didn't have water to wash ourselves, but we were getting lots of soaps. So I had at home so many soaps, and I know that my mom was saying, what do we do with these soaps now? But we heard that in one village across the mountain, they did not have soaps, but they had potatoes. So my mom decided to send me, I was 14, with a woman and a man. I remember there was woman, man, and horse. She decided to send me through the tunnel. We had a tunnel that we could exit, but you needed special permission to send me to go across the mountain and to go to this village and exchange soaps for potatoes. And I had 10 soaps, and one soap was worth of kilo of potatoes. And I remember first house where I went, that there was an old gentleman, and he felt so sorry for me, and he gave me 16 kilos of potatoes, and I couldn't carry it. And I said, you cannot give me 16 kilos of potato. I don't know what to do with them. But that means that I also had to arrive home very fast with those potatoes, because potatoes can only last that much. So then we exchanged potatoes for flour when I came back home, and then some kilos of potatoes were exchanged for me because I didn't have shoes. And I remember we bought these shoes for these potatoes, and those shoes broke in like 3 days. So that was biggest trauma of my life. I'm teasing. But when I lost these shoes that I walked so much for to get these potatoes. So those are kind of like experiences from kids' perspective. And another one is there was lots of going door to door experiences where they were asking to take children from parents to evacuate us. That was happening especially at the beginning of the war. So they did not want parents to go, but they wanted to kind of like take children and evacuate them to countries around the Bosnia, Italy, Germany, Turkey, wherever, whatever country would accept children. So my parents put me and my brother on evacuation list, but in the last minute they decided not to send us. So they didn't send us. They left us home. Um, but lots of these children were adopted. They never came back. Their identities were changed, and that's what became my research topic. I was really interested to track these children that were evacuated and that they never came back, and that's actually what I did for my PhD, focusing specifically on Italy and why Italy did not return healthy Bosnian children. Not any children. They were requesting to return children who were not healthy, but not healthy children. They were adopted. So those are some of the experiences as a child in Bosnia and during the war, and losses, huge losses, losing everyday neighbors, friends, family, you name it. You would never know what every day would bring.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing all of that. And um, believe it or not, out of the members that are in here, there are some people were there during Desert Storm and that have experienced other stuff. So I've seen a lot of what you're talking about. When I was in Syria, mostly. Syria was probably the worst because that was back in 2017, where a regime really came into power, and there was all those refugee camps set up, and there were very similar. Small children, like youngest, would run up to American soldiers and just, try to ask for water or something. And of course, we didn't make them give us anything for it. We would give it to them, but we can't get out of the vehicle to do this. So we would throw it to one kid, and then you would watch 20 other kids come up, and then they're fighting this one person. And there's nothing we can do, sadly. We can't get down and you would see all that kind of stuff. So I just wanted to see it from your perspective, because I know that I have seen it from my perspective, but that's completely different. I only see it in the passing. Um, I don't I didn't live it. I didn't see the day to day. I didn't experience, something as to that effect where friends were, doing things or favors or whatever you want to call it for food or of course in the military we lose friends to combat, but that's expected. Whereas, living in that area, that's completely different. It's not an expected loss. Now, with all that being said, what would you probably characterize the main difference between trauma from war zones and service members to civilian trauma? Because what I personally think is I think trauma is just trauma across the board, and it doesn't matter what situation it was that put you in there, because eventually, when you get down to the root of it, which we will, of course, as we move forward, trauma still does about the same core concepts
Mhm.
physically, mentally, and then, of course, it's like a puzzle pieces. It's going to get to everyone a little bit different, but at the root of it, trauma for me is just trauma. But I'm sure you'll be able to elaborate a lot more on that.
Exactly. And that's what you are saying. There are lots of similarities. It's because nervous system, what is inside of us, does not differentiate between different types of trauma. Terror is terror, and some of the common outcomes of trauma are both civilians and veterans are hypervigilance, sleep disturbances, emotional numbing, avoidance to show up across all trauma types. And for me, it's more, that is one way to look at, but another way that I really, really look at trauma, it really depends on vulnerabilities. It's kind of like combination of what you how are you already formed as a person? Like, what are your protective factors? What are your risk factors as a person? Who are your supports? And the difference between, I can talk about my way of trauma and how I experienced is that it was, number one, it was continuous. It was happening over certain periods of time. So it really gave me a lot of time to adjust. At some point, it became part of life. I know that sometimes it sounds so strange, but sometimes I say to people, for me, it was much harder to readjust and it was much more traumatic for me when war stopped and we had to readjust and I think lots of veterans can relate to this because that is the same like pulling you out of war zone and bringing you back to your whatever normal living is. And it took us many years to just kind of like readjust from because we adjusted to war. Our survival instinct was very strong. We had that collectivism. We did not have food, water, but we were all together in this. We kind of like had that combined experience, and we were all trying together to survive, to be there for each other. We had that shared experience. Um, but what is and I experienced that when I came to US, when I left my community and stayed by myself for the first time. That is when I started experiencing symptoms that I could not relate with anyone around me with. They did not know what I went through. They genuinely wanted to understand, but there was just something missing that we could not relate, and I could not. And then another thing is, I think every time, and I would share my experiences, I would be gently advised maybe to visit psychologists, maybe to visit It was always kind of like diagnosis based, and that's not what I needed. I did not need diagnosed. I just needed relief and just needed somebody to connect with to talk about these experiences. So there is a difference when you have that shared experience and when you are going with all collective during over period of time versus when you are kind of like in something that happens maybe less often, but it's isolated, that isolated experience. Um, Maybe differences are also as a civilian, kind of like all segments of your safety are touched. Your school, your home, your community. Maybe for veterans, at least you know your family's safe. This is impacting only you. But then again, where is the difficulty there is that when you go back to your home, your family cannot relate. They want to, they have but they always cannot relate with your experience. So you sometimes within your own family experience that isolation versus me, where some also information were filtered down. My parents were very supportive and they were regulating their stress pretty well. So whatever was channeled to me was carefully chosen and I was protected by that. And then also, I think in terms of what I always, when I'm talking to veterans, it's veterans experienced lots of helplessness, like we did, in terms what they could have done, at least in our war. Lots of international soldiers in Bosnia had to watch kids being killed, and they were not allowed to do anything. They were not allowed to intervene. They were not allowed to step in and save. And I know that that brought and created lots of difficult experiences because I do work with veterans here now with people who were in Bosnia. And again, I think for both categories, returning to normal life feels very foreign. That's
Yeah,
kind of
no,
where we can share.
I agree 100%. You hit the nail on the head. I mean, throughout this year, while we've been doing all these shows, the constant common ground, that everyone has said, from the vets I brought to the, actual active duty service members. We had one person join us from overseas. That adjustment, like you had said, whether civilian or not, during those war times, it is when you get home, and that's that helplessness, like you had said. That's basically you've literally listed almost a year's worth of our forums all in one little spot, which is why I think it's amazing that we have you today. So now here comes the fun part, now the meat and potatoes, what everybody's here for. So, in your own words, scientifically, how do we define trauma? I know it's a very, fluid term, but like when it comes down to the core, how do they scientifically define it?
That is a very a very good question. And yeah, if you open the literature, there's lots of definitions there, what it really is. But something that I came to understand, what I'm using when I'm teaching students and when I'm experiencing, really uh, unique individual experience of certain event. It can be individual event, series of events. And it doesn't have to be even event, it's conditions, it's what you are experiences where your own ability to integrate your coping skills, your emotional adjustments, your emotional experience is overwhelmed. It's very hard to grasp. And also it's connected and related to your own experiences, like it's subjective, in relation to threat to life, body integrity, even your mental health, sanity. But again, as I said already, it is not really about the event and what happened. It is about that uniqueness, what you carry within you as an ability to, what are your, maybe to put it this way, what are your vulnerabilities? Because that is what trauma reprocessing depends on. What are your vulnerabilities? Who is your support system? How is your safety? Because sometimes when I compare experiences, I sometimes felt more safe in the war in the basement than than I felt safe when I came by myself as an immigrant woman in America. Why? It's because I did not know language. Everything was foreign. Not that anybody wanted to hurt me or anything like that, but I didn't know what is safety in this community. Who is there to protect me? What am I to expect? There was no predictability, very similar to the beginnings of the war until we established. Um, so that is kind of like how I look into trauma, what trauma means to inability to cope.
I like that because what you kind of gave us more of a concept right behind it all. And usually when you go into like a textbook, it gives us like black and white, straight definition for what it is. And for me, like what you just described, I don't know how it felt for everyone else, was more of like a virus almost, or it's
Mm-hmm.
something that actually you deal with, but then it finds those vulnerabilities in your system. And then once it finds those vulnerabilities, then it starts to kind of exploit those vulnerabilities. And then you're stuck dealing with it. Kind of like when you get infected with a cold, simple. It sounds a lot more relatable. And also, I like that it doesn't just put it in a box. So now my next question would be,
Can I,
you
Alex,
know
just
how,
explain something else? I don't know if I can share the screen, but this screen would be, let me see if I can, just see if I can share the screen because I wanted to show you just kind of like a little, I don't think I can, but that's okay. Because what I wanted to explain is, kind of like parts of the brain and where it becomes a little bit scientific. We have this part of the brain, a little almond shape part of the brain that is called amygdala, and that is our fire alarm. That is our emotional memory center where kind of like memories are stored. And
Mhm.
when that part of the brain senses that there is a threat, and threat can be real or perceived. So real means somebody is really threatening to me, but perceived can be whatever is stored in my body, I recognize as potential danger, which can be loud sound, in my case, loud sound, screaming. My brain straight goes into this is a threat, we need to protect ourselves. So when that is activated, frontal cortex, which is part of the brain that analyzes, problem solves, learn that one shuts down. You're not able to think what we say in our plain language, like you're not able to think logically and you're not able to reason. And that is why kind of like emotional brain gets activated and ways survival instincts get activated. So it's not, again, it's not about remembering the event as event that happened, but all these little segments that were attached to this event that would get activated and remind you of painful experience. You understand what I mean? It's not about remembering experience, event that happened, but it's remembering all these sensory events around the experience that get activated in trauma response.
I like that a lot. Thank you. Um, so with trauma, like grief. We all know grief comes in stages. Are there actually like stages that you go through with trauma typically and that you have to process through? And if so, what are they?
Um, it's not linear. I will just say that it's really not linear. There are many different events that happen. The first one, you know that it's like, first one is shock. It's you go into survival mode when something painful happens, and what happens with body at that stage is that body prioritizes staying alive. That's the only focus. And then other stages that come, it's intrusion, flashbacks, nightmares, avoidance and numbing, shutting down, not being able to cope, hyperarousal, which is that irritability, anxiety, being edgy. Those are all kind of like stages. Anger, which is what I really had for a long time. And then reintegration, and kind of like you settle all of that, finding a way how to find meanings, process, and reintegrate. So now I am against hierarchical because if I'm going by hierarchical, it would not serve the purpose, and I would not treat my clients appropriately because this can show up at any stage. And I think in my specific example, I think it jumped some stages. I think my shock happened much later when because I think as a child I was blocking lots of experiences, or maybe I was not ready to process them, or maybe I didn't even understand. My brain was not developed enough to understand what is life, what is happening, although I was seeing a lot, but I couldn't process those information. I didn't understand the real danger until I grew up, and I think that's when shock happened, when I started realizing. So, and I see that with my clients is that they come in different stages. And sometimes they would come completely presenting as nothing has happened to them, like learning how to mask. So I would not go by hierarchy. I would rather go by really trying to meet people where they're at, and what symptoms they are manifesting in terms of reprocessing what has happened to them.
Okay, yeah, I like that a lot. Yeah, the same thing with like grief. I know it's not really a linear process, but I have never actually had someone sit there and then break down like different stages of trauma. I don't know if others here have or have not, but it's nice to actually hear some of those because like thinking about it on my end, I've gone through almost everything that you've said. I just didn't realize, like, hey, these are like identified uh, things that people tend to go through with this. I thought it was just kind of a more like a running into a brick wall, if for lack of a better term. So now, side effects of trauma. A lot of people know the mental side, and I do want to talk about those too, like what mentally it'll do to you if you don't process your trauma correctly, and if you have prolonged trauma. But I also want to talk about the physical aspect
Yes.
because I think with trauma, the physical aspect, at least for the veterans, is a really big issue because a lot of military personnel are very fit people, very healthy people, and then as they start physically actually getting sick from this trauma, it affects their mental status as well. And it just kind of comes together and then makes everything a lot worse. And we don't spend enough time talking about the physical side effects. Everyone's so worried about the mental side effects. So I
Mhm.
just want to hit both the physical and the mental. So that way we can elaborate on those and get that out there for people who just want to know more.
Mm-hmm. I'm so happy that you brought it up, Alex, because I think lots of people, in my experience, would just come into treatment when they start experiencing these physical side effects. And some of the physical side effects that I most commonly see is really chronic pain and people not being able to determine where is the root, where this is coming from. All medical results would come back and return as I remember once somebody received a list of 200 possible reasons. It's like, how is this even helpful? What it could be, but doctors would not be able to determine where is this rooted and where is it coming from. Sleep disturbances, sleep issues, anything with metabolism and food reprocessing, with gut health. People would feel nausea, fatigue, headaches, even hormonal shifts. We have here in Canada Gabor Mate. He is the one who wrote book When Body Says No, the hidden sides of stress, where he's really talking about these connections between hormonal and between physical, between gut health, hormonal health, and stress, autoimmune flare-ups. That is one also of the physical outcomes, and just nervous system dysregulation in general. So those are physical, and then with lots of people, I really sometimes my entry point is by doing somatics, not even talking about the experiences, not recognizing, acknowledging anything around mental, but really working on calming the body first and reintegrating that safety in the body and connecting people with themselves because lots of clients that I have would feel that strong dissociation and would not even feel that they are present in their own body.
Yeah. No, I understand that. And I like you mentioned the metabolism because that's actually a very common thing with service members. There are a lot of service members who actually experience issues digestively. And what happens is with these service members, our cortisol levels skyrocket. And then
Exactly.
they'll still be working out. They'll still be doing all of these correct things. However, they'll also gain massive amount of weight, which then
Yes.
affects their mental health because these are service members, these are veterans, these are people who are generally fit. And because they're generally fit, um, they gaining that weight is going to be an issue. Um, so I'm glad that you brought that one up.
Yes, and you see, as a child in the war, when we did not have food for that very reason and trauma response, I was obese. I was very obese in the war uh, that people were thinking that we are hiding food, but it is not. It was very hormonal. It was metabolically what was happening within me as a child to cope with stress. So that's where I learned early that I am prone to have these difficulties when my cortisol levels are really high. But that is pretty common, even if you do not eat and there is no food, which was happened to me. That can happen because of trauma response, because of gastro issues.
Yeah, no, and I understand that one completely. I realized this while I was getting treatment for my post-traumatic stress disorder. For a very long time, I'm a very active person. I do boxing. I work out 5 times a week. I run at least a mile every day. And out of nowhere, taking what medication was I taking? Wellbutrin.
Okay.
Um, they tried me for Lexapro. Any combat veteran will tell you Lexapro uh, it basically gives most of us more nightmares than what we had. It's just not one that we like to go to. So sadly, we start gravitating towards Wellbutrin. And I'm not saying the drugs anyway for, to say these are bad, don't take them. This is no opinion. This is just what happened to me. I ended up gaining about 20 pounds when I started taking this stuff, regularly. And then the other issue I had had is if I had missed a dose of the Wellbutrin, I would double down back to like even darker thoughts and bigger issues because now my body that was used to getting, you know, the balance from the meds was now imbalanced more than it originally was. So I actually worked my way off that medication completely. And you know this because I had talked to you and you told me I was crazy for cold turkey dropping it. But
Mhm.
um, with that, um, I noticed that once I stopped taking it, I was able to slowly start bringing my weight down. So I've lost like 6 pounds since I stopped taking it about a month ago. Um, and I work out, like I said, all the time. But what I didn't
Mhm.
realize and what I didn't know was that cortisone and that being an issue, and then also just that because I was having issues with trauma in my head, my body started um, basically breaking down, and I was having like massive pains in my hips and my back and
Mhm.
different parts of my body, and I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't hurt myself. I just
Mhm.
and it wouldn't go away. And I was going to doctors and they couldn't tell me. And it turns out that once I started um, focusing on getting my headspace correct, some of that stuff started sorting itself out. And then I was left with the residual, which was okay, some of the stuff is actually physically damaged that I need to focus on. I'm working on that now. But until I was able to understand that the trauma that I was dealing with also was affecting me physically, which then
Exactly.
um, would affect me even more mentally until I could get that understanding and kind of really get a grip on that situation. Um, I was kind of just at a loss for a while. Um,
Hmm. And you see, there's something as you're talking about this, there's another segment. Doesn't it's not kind of like side effect of trauma as trauma, but just being in the war and being in the area that is affected by bombing and by radiation, and I do not want to underestimate that and to diminish it because being exposed to all of that, for example, the reason why I'm wearing glasses, again, now thinking about physical sides of all of this is I'm wearing glasses because as a child I was trying so much to read during the night because when it's winter, dark is at 4 p.m. We don't have anything else to do. We don't have electricity, so I had to read. I was reading a lot. I read every possible book that was available to me at that time because of that boredom. But I had to kind of like read like this, and I lost my sight. Then because of malnutrition my autoimmune system was so weakened and I lost my teeth. I lost all teeth as a teenager and was really bullied and it took me so many years after that to repair like physically what was happening to me as a girl. Like nails wouldn't grow, teeth would fall, just even biting the bread it was so weekend and we didn't have access to doctors. So kind of like it's not directly side effect of trauma, but it is really like side effect of being at war and people being exposed to radiation and bombing had a huge impact on physical health that we need to think about as well.
okay, so we hit the physical. Now, most of us do know mental, but can you elaborate a little bit more on the intensity of the mental side effects and also what those mental side effects will essentially do to you um, internally?
But that's that sense of safety and I think for me it's really very challenging and difficult when you don't feel safe with yourself in your body, when you cannot trust your reactions and when you have that emotional reactivity where after the effect you yourself would be asking what on earth has just happened, what did I do and what provoked this, and besides that, it is intrusive thoughts, flashbacks, nightmares, emotional reactivity, sometimes shame and guilt as well. Feeling that disconnection and lots of trauma response would be that dissociation and losing trust in yourself and others. And then we have all these kind of like clinically determined, like anxiety and depression and PTSD. PTSD is just kind of like all of this together. But that is in terms of emotional side. And what stays in mind, I remember when I came, this is a funny story, we always laugh about this. When I came to US, my husband wanted to bring me for a walk, and then he decided some park, I don't know, it was grass was really high, and I didn't want to enter that grass. I said, I'm not entering the grass. And he was like, why are you not entering the grass? What is going on? But in my head, what is really deeply stored in me is that when there is a long grass, when there is kind of like high grass, that means nobody passed there. That means maybe unexploded bombs or mines are there. So we don't go in long grass. But how do I explain that to somebody who never experienced that? So kind of like those are all situations and events that are stored in you. Sometimes you don't even know where they are rooted, but kind of like you exhibit certain behaviors that to other people who didn't have the same experience might sound very weird.
Yeah, no, no, I totally get that. The two that you had said that no one that I've ever brought on has really got into, but people that are trying to help those that are struggling with trauma or those that are experiencing trauma, need to understand. Elaborate on the shame and guilt. Why would someone feel shame and guilt for, going through trauma experiences for something that wasn't their fault that they experienced? Where does that come from? And then what does that do? Because I think when we're talking about suicidal ideations and then disconnecting and isolationism, I think those two things are probably the key that lead to the others. And if, we that are here and those that see this online or any other time can start understanding that there's shame and guilt, which, to someone who hasn't experienced it or someone who hasn't heard it or someone that isn't an expert, you'd be like, well, why? Why would there be shame and guilt? I don't understand that. Um, what is it? Where's it coming from? And what does it do?
It can really be multi-layered. It can be attached. Number one, it's like if it can be really connected to yourself. What did you have capacity and ability to cope, to do, to experience, to impact? It can be kind of like related to others. Like if anybody who was really exposed to the close loss, that shame and guilt can be related to what could have I done better? Could have I helped? Why it wasn't me? There's sometimes that kind of like survival guilt as well. I don't know if you can relate to that, but survival guilt is like,
Absolutely.
why them? Why not me? This is unfair. And now feeling even that kind of like would increase suicidal ideation because people would be feeling undeserving to live, undeserving to be here because lots of other colleagues, friends, neighbors, in my case, family members did not survive. So there is a huge survival guilt that is usually people are not aware of it, but that is how it's called and that is what is happening.
Okay. Yeah. No, thank you. And yes, survivor's guilt, I promise you, is something that almost anybody who's experienced war or maybe in a vehicle accident,
Yeah.
civilian or not, any situation. And then I do know also that there is that guilt that sometimes people feel just because they are going through it. Like they feel guilty that they're out with their friends or they're out with their family and like something is ruining their mood. And then now they feel guilty and they start kind of drawing themselves back in because they don't
Yeah.
want to subject everyone around them to what they're going through. And they also don't want to ruin it, whatever that experience is, because that happens a lot. I've been told that before, like, hey, you're ruining this stuff. Like you're ruining this event. And what had happened while I'm at wherever I'm at, right? Maybe I went someplace that just for that day, being in a crowd wasn't it for me. Like it's too much. For me, one of the biggest things that'll overstimulate myself is I already have an excessive amount of ringing in my ears. I also
Mhm.
suffer from an affliction due to concussion and not like hit my head concussion, like concussion from explosions, where I have had to have surgery on my eardrums because my ears can no longer regulate pressure. So at all times, my ears feel like I'm like at 10,000 feet elevation. So it just feels like someone's pushing in on my ears. So when that happens, because it's not always, but when I have that immense amount of pressure pushing on my ears, which then gives me headaches with the ringing, and then I'm in a crowd where, hundreds of people are also talking all of that noise. There are people in here that were with me one time. Like I threw a fork across a restaurant once out of nowhere because I was just so angry and so just overwhelmed from just that simple experience. And like I said, with that guilt, I think that for me, that's an example where I do something like that, and then I feel guilty because like I didn't do it because I wanted to be you know a jerk, or I don't want to say too many bad words, but I didn't want to be a bad person. It was just how my body reacted to it. And, there was so much anger and frustration that in that moment, I had to do something. I had to get it out. And something as simple as like, I'm gonna toss this fork across. You're not really even thinking about it, just happening and then
Exactly.
getting up and leaving. But that has been a thing. And then what happens is if you have these situations, because I've been told on like a number, maybe at least a dozen times, like, hey, you're ruining this. Like you need to stop.
Mhm.
And and then what happens is you keep hearing that, you keep hearing that, you keep hearing that. And then
You
those
start
people that you,
isolating.
yeah, exactly. The people you used to talk to, the people you used to spend time with, you either stop talking or you stop spending time with them, or you decide to internalize what's going on. And instead of like letting them know, like, hey, I'm not okay right now. Like, I need to take a minute. You just leave it alone and then you just sit there and let it irritate you and let it dig and dig and dig while everyone else is, enjoying themselves because you don't want to ruin it for everyone, even though at the end of the day it's not your fault. But I think that's a trap that anybody that's got any kind of trauma goes through, where a lot of people just don't have empathy for those people that have been through these things because how do they understand?
How do you?
Unless you've done it.
Exactly.
Unless you've done it or you've been through it, you won't really truly understand what they're going through. So because they lack that empathy, they can't relate. And since they can't relate, no matter how you try to explain it to them, either falls upon deaf ears, or you don't even explain it at all because you feel, hey, there's absolutely no situation in which the person I'm with is going to understand what I tell them. So thank you for that. And yes, you're absolutely correct with the survivor's guilt. And then what I just elaborated on that guilt. So
What you
here's the
got to
big
say,
ticket.
Alex, I just
Go
wanted to
ahead.
kind of add because for me was the hardest one was to connect here with Halloween. When I had my first Halloween and when I saw body parts, when I saw blood
Oh
everywhere and
yeah.
people were doing that for it was really extremely hard for me to kind of like go through that and to deal with that. And kind of like to relate with, especially with the fun part of it. I think I first time could have related because I re read it one of your poems. I think you were talking about that. I was like, finally, somebody understands what those memories are because I could not relate that. I could not relate through that experience with anybody here. Now I'm okay. It's 25 years later, but I had to go through that process. And first, what you said, like first that acknowledgement, because often you do not know what is happening, and kind of like put the name, naming it, and being aware is the first step in again coping with trauma and reintegrating. That's how I call it, reintegration.
Okay. Yeah, no, and I totally get that with the Halloween too. To this day, my family knows this. I can watch any kind of war movie that has to do with like the old historical wars, but I have tried about 4 times. I cannot make it through Restrepo, which is a
I never.
helmet cam
Mhm.
documentary, not Hollywood, nothing, but a helmet cam documentary because every time Restrepo gets to a village in the mountainside that got hit with an airstrike, and then there's an elderly village elder who comes out and he's just carrying out children from the ages of like 5 to 10, and they're all dead. And he's carrying the children and they're laying them out, and he turns to the American soldiers who are now coming through the village and he points to the children. He says, tell me where the Taliban are. Where in this group of people is there Taliban? And this was back, in the height of the war. So ROE was a little different. They were getting hit from the mountains, so then they just called an airstrike, and the whole mountains got lit up. And I guess, things happen, and there happened to be small villages along those mountains that had nothing to do with the conflict. And every time Restrepo's on, it hits that point, I will break down in tears. I will turn it off. And then um, with some of the more modern films, like The Outpost, which was the defense of Cop Keating. I talked to one of the survivors of Cop Keating on the phone for about an hour yesterday. He's a really good friend of mine. He was going to come today. I think he's got something going on. So, luckily, we are recording this one, so he will get to see it. Um, but he is, very much probably one of the most affected people that I've ever met when it comes to this stuff. But he's also one of like the least emotional people I've ever met. Over time, from what I see and from what I understand, he has become an expert at internalizing, and like
Mm.
a building could blow up and 100 people could be just everywhere, a giant mess, and he'll just look at it and start helping to clean up and say nothing.
Mm.
And that is where he's at. And as his friend, I see that. And then as a peer in the military, I respect it because it's like I know that you've been through so much already that this just doesn't phase you anymore. But also, as somebody myself who has struggled, I know that it does actually phase him. It's just he's become so accustomed to putting on that mask and
Exactly.
processing it in the way that he has trained himself to process it. Because anyone who doesn't know about Cop Keating, we're talking about hundreds of Taliban taking on one small base where they lost so many people. The battle was actually so intense that there are two surviving Medal of Honor recipients from that battle. Um, and sadly, I had announced what I think 3 episodes ago, Maria Vanessa, on September 11th this year. Nick Davidson, who was a survivor of that battle, sadly also took his own life. So we lost another one of the heroes from that day. Now, moving into the other end, which is the meat and potatoes, why everybody's here. Um, we are all here because we understand that there's an issue and we want to help. How do we start identifying those signs of someone struggling with trauma? Like in my friend and this is why I brought him up. Because from the outside, you can't see it. But
No.
how can we pick up on these things? Is there tendencies we can pick up? Is there a sign that we can look for? Or how can we find these people that are trying to secretly struggle with this trauma on their own so that way we can be there for them and we can help them if we need to, or at least we can push them in the right direction to get them the help they need so that it doesn't get to a point where the ideations and the guilt and all that stuff starts settling in.
That is a very good question, Alex. And it really, again, depending on personality, depending on how people just cope with other things in their lives, but kind of like changes in behaviors that you can detect. And it's not sometimes also about even identifying how much is it about what do we do when we identify and what is our response and reaction, and how do we approach. And I can get into both of those. But some of behaviors that people would exhibit would be um, all kind of like sudden withdrawal, shutting down, especially if it's out of character. For somebody, somebody's usually talkative, but now all of a sudden the answer would be everything is fine, everything is okay. I'm so, as a therapist, trauma therapist, that is the question that really invites me the most. I'm fine, everything is okay. Especially when that everything is okay happened too fast. When they sometimes avoid reminders, when they avoid reminders of event. If you're looking into body, sometimes you would see like some startle responses, hypervigilance. I recognize people who had experienced trauma when they come in my office from the doors, from when they enter my doors, when they close the doors. Scanning of environment is happening very fast. It doesn't have to be war. It can be domestic violence, really anything. Um, but there is that scanning, there's that hypervigilance, there is that reassessing safety at all times, not feeling safe with themselves, trouble sleeping, of course, difficulty expressing what they feel. And for me as a therapist, what really shows up is that sharing about traumatic experiences does not again come as a linear experience. It comes in segments, in fragments. People are not really able to chronologically share the story and share this happened on November 2025, this happened on December 2025, but it's more kind of like scattered. But as I said, like one thing is, and one way of looking at that is identifying, but what do we do when we identify? I had experience that somebody wanted to test me how, because I was sharing this somewhere in the group, and I said that I'm really very scared when I hear screaming at the night because it woke me up so many times as a child in the basement, and I wouldn't know what was happening, so I was frightened. And somebody decided to test it to see how really traumatized I am, and and they screamed at the night and they wanted to see what would be my reaction, and I really was re-traumatized. So when you identify somebody and when they say do not test their triggers, especially if they in a trusting way share with you, if they're your partner, if you are in any way connected to the person, do not test, do not do something on purpose or thinking exposure would help. Trying to make sounds that are really triggering because exposure, but you need to really, it's about approaching very, very gently, validating feelings without pushing for details. I know that lots of professionals would sometimes think that what would help would be constantly talking about trauma. It does help to some point, but then it doesn't help anymore. So details are really not always necessary if, especially if individual does not want to share. If they don't want to share, and do not pathologize, do not place diagnoses on people. I think for trauma survivors, the last thing they need to hear is diagnosis. That will come, that will happen later. But what they really need in the moment is presence, not solution. Just somebody holding space, just somebody to be there for them, to help them feel safe, and really asking people how does support look like for them. Not what you think would be support, but how does support look like for them. And doesn't it always have to be professional support? It doesn't
Thank
have
you.
to, right? Professional
You
support.
have, yeah. But you just hit one of the biggest nails on the head that I've said so many times. Empathy over sympathy. And sometimes just being there in the moment helps more than anything else. Not asking questions, not prying, just putting your hand on their shoulder and sitting there quietly next to them while they are processing their stuff can be one of the most powerful things somebody can do for someone who is struggling. And it's great to finally hear that from, like an actual professional doctor, PhD who does trauma therapy, because it is something that I've been pitching. But, I'm only a guy who has been through something myself, and I can say what works for me and what's worked for the people I've tried to help. But to finally hear it from the other end is like, okay, cool, there it is. Write it in stone and put it up for everybody to see. You don't need to pry. You don't need to prove things, right? I would yell downstairs to my spouse, who, when I got home from one of my deployments, set an alarm that sounded exactly like indirect fire, and turned it on for me after my first deployment, and watched me scramble, and then waking up and looking for my rifle, looking for my kit, screaming, "Where's my stuff?" Meanwhile, I'm in my own bedroom at my house with a bassinet in a corner and a newborn, and I'm still freaking out, sweating, breathing heavy, trying to figure out where all my stuff was. And then I freaked out even more when my rifle wasn't right next to me. I started asking my wife, and it didn't hit. It didn't process. I'm yelling at my wife, "Where is my rifle?" And she's like, "What rifle? Babe, you're home." And it didn't click. I
It
didn't
did.
hear her, and I kept going through it. And I laughed about it when it happened, and we made some jokes, but it did really, really, really bother me. Um,
Of
for
course.
for a while. And then, after that incident, it never happened again. I think all my family started kind of really understanding a lot more, just from seeing like the little things that would set me off that before nothing would. I used to be the most outgoing person. I used to volunteer with disabled kids, for sports. I used to, be the one person that would want to play with like all the young kids, keep them distracted. I was that guy at these events. And I don't do any of that anymore. Um, I'm at that point now where it's like I'll be with my kids, I'll be with kids of family and whatnot. But like besides that, I don't want that stimulation anymore. I just kind of want to be left alone. Um, and when you say the other stuff too, like how do you help somebody? I've had that issue where people like try to pry and try to like, well, what's bothering you? Why is that bothering you? Da da
Yeah.
da, and it just keep going, and then you're trying to explain it, and then eventually we get to that point in our head where we're like, well, there's no point. I'm fine. And then that's where the "I'm fine" start coming out instead.
Yeah.
And then, then it shifts back into that guilt that we were talking about. So like you said, is there anything else that you want to harp on what we should do if we identify these people? And then I think the big question is, when and how do we go about, if we think it's necessary, trying to open the door to getting this person to go seek professional help? Because I
Mm-hmm.
think I know it's a hard one, all right, and you already know where I'm going with this, but
Mm-hmm.
as concerned family, as concerned friends, there's only so much we could do. We're not doctors. We're not this. Where do we draw that line, and how do we open that door? Is it better to kind of make the suggestion and hopefully get that person that you're trying to help open the door, or and then what if they don't want to? Like how do we force it open for them in a way
That is
safely?
that is a great question. But one I think I wanted to add when you were talking about identifying is I wanted to add just comparing, because sometimes people who had like, let's say if me and another war child had same experience, the way how we experienced it, how we coped is completely different. And I think that is the danger that we can run into by saying, oh, it's okay, I managed it well, you will be fine. Like to try to avoid that comparison and minimizing if somebody is dealing or coping in a different way. So just for survivors to be really aware of that is that if we went through something and if we have great family supports and we are okay now, that does not mean that, and then you are a different person through years. Who you were 10, 20 years ago, it's not who you are. So it will be changing. The same experience will be affecting you differently as well. So just kind of like wanted to add that. But now bringing somebody through the door, it's really so now professionally, and I know people who are in mental health profession, there are certain things that you breach confidentiality, which is risk to self and others, child abuse, and all of that when it happens. So that one, I never negotiate safety. However, I'm supportive and however meet my clients where they're at, I never negotiate. If somebody is in danger for themselves and others, I'm calling them, I'm breaching it. But the thing is that lots of people will not, you will not even know when that is happening. What I still struggle with this, how to bring somebody because people, lots of people who need help and support, they are isolating. You will not, sometimes, Alex, that I asked you recently, there is a police officer here. I work with his wife. He has a very high suicidal ideation, lots of trauma that he see, and we just cannot get him. And we cannot get them through any doors to seek for professional help. So, and I'm struggling myself how to make people come and how to but as I said, sometimes it doesn't have to be even if it's one person that individuals feel safe. It can be peer to peer. It does not to have to be mental health professional. It doesn't have to be therapist. It doesn't have to be psychiatrist. If that is one person, spouse, brother, sister, neighbor, whoever, that safe person needs to just continue checking in and be there for support and just wait and be patient. For some people might take months, for some people 10 months, for some people 3 years, but to wait for them to be ready to seek help and support and really not to force, not to force
Yeah, because that's usually where you start getting into where they'll pull away from everybody. And
from
then
everybody.
if you were that one person they did trust, and then essentially you didn't mean to, but you took that from that person you were trying to help. And if you were that one person, and then they're like, I thought I could talk to you, and now it turns out you just want to shove me in this direction. Now you've accidentally and inadvertently, without any, malintent, just put that person in probably the most dangerous situation they've been in, and the entire time they were struggling. Because now there's that feeling of betrayal, there's that feeling of loneliness and isolation, and then um, just a whole spiral. All of this is just a huge, delicate, touchy process, um, which is why I like to bring in all these people. So the last one I want to hit before
Can I
we
add
just
something, Alex? What
absolutely.
you are doing is really very impactful, and I want to use this platform really to say thank you and thank you for everything that you are doing because you kind of like are putting yourself out there and sharing that I have same ex that this is you. Like I have same experiences. I'm out there. I'm not hi You are not hiding your struggle. You're not hiding what you are going through. You're not hiding how is that for you, and it really makes people so easy to connect with you, either if it's through your book, either if the because you're really, really trying so unconditionally to connect with people and to be there. So you are one of the research. I mean, I'm in Canada, and you and me collaborate so much because we in Canada don't have those, like we don't have a person like you that I'm aware of. But like just even with you exposing yourself and being open is, I think you're helping lots of people who are in isolation because you have these alternative ways of reaching out and show your presence. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That means so much, especially coming from you. So, um, oh wow. All right, but so not to go super deep because we can, and I do want to open the floor because there are people. And thank you again to everybody. I am so sorry about the technical issues we had today. And even with the technical issues, we still had an upwards of like about 20 people coming in and out. And then like everyone here was nice enough to agree to let me record it. And just so everyone who's still here knows, I'm going to stop recording before we open the floor up for questions. So that way, if there's a genuine question you want to ask, I don't want anyone to feel that, their stuff might be put somewhere. Um, but the last thing I want to ask is, so treatment options. There are dozens, right? I'm not trying to push one. I'm not trying to advertise one or the other. What are some of them? Maybe not ones that people normally hear about, and then just like a little brief thing on what it is. Not whether you recommend that one more or the other, because this isn't like a one, shoe fits all. But just what are some of them? Because there are a lot of them out there that are outside of your basic sit in an office and, talk to one person who's writing on a piece of paper and just staring at you.
Mhm. I will share with you kind of like how I was growing professionally and what I was adding to my feathers as I was kind of like identifying as the gaps in talk. But again, starting with basic just talking therapy, it's a good entry point and good way. Some people's entry point is through going out and seeking medication. And again, I cannot advocate for or against, but sometimes medication is needed for managing the sleep, for managing certain other physical symptoms. It doesn't have to be for mental health or depression or anxiety, just to provide, and the therapy will not be effective lots of times if medication does not provide certain stabilization. So there is that avenue. Some people would go that way. For me personally, I reached the point I was using a lot trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a therapy that kind of like restructure the trauma-linked thoughts. But I came to the point where this therapy would not allow me to kind of like work with body, with physical symptoms. So I was training myself more in somatic therapies, working through the body. I eventually got trained in EMDR, which is reprocessing of trapped memories and negative beliefs about yourself. Dialectical behavioral therapy is something that I'm using. This one is really for emotional regulation and distress tolerance. And then group therapy. If there is group therapy, again, it's double-edged sword, but group therapy as well can provide that community sharing and community understanding. And then for lots of people now going back from all these typical therapies, but like cultural and community-specific healings, rituals, storytelling, meaning making, however that looks for them, religion, prayer, people do lots of many different ways. But if that helps, that is the avenue for some people. And then again, for all of this, safety and stability first, because non-therapy will work if that is not established as a foundation.